Ask any submariner to describe their greatest enemy, and you'll probably hear two words: water and fire. As we've just seen with the Russian sub Kursk, these two elements can cripple a submarine and kill everyone on it in a matter of minutes. So how would a U.S. submarine crew fight back if caught in a similar situation? Are U.S. sub crews better trained to fight a fire underwater? MSNBC investigates when aboard the USS Augusta, a nuclear-powered attack sub patrolling the Atlantic. The tragedy in the Barents Sea hits close to home for the men of the United States Submarine Force. These underwater pictures of a sunken Kursk are a grim reminder of the dangers they volunteered to confront out at sea. For Commander Bill Geary, the captain of the nuclear-powered fast attack submarine USS Augusta, safety always weighs heavily on his mind.
There is no decision that is made that could affect the safety and well-being of the submarine or the crew that isn't looked at on the risks versus gain.
And those risks are ever present, especially once the Augusta begins to dive.
Captain, sir, the ship is rigged for dive. Request permission to submerge the ship.
Prior to submerging the submarine, there is a routine where the ship is rigged for dive. A two-party check of all the ways that water can come into the submarine or ways that you could prevent the submarine from operating its control mechanisms.
Submerge the ship. Submerge the ship. Diving officer, submerge the ship.
Dive! Dive!
Submarines operate below the surface of the sea by taking on water weight in their ballast tanks.
Outer leg off vents are open.
Very well done.
Fast attack submarines like the Augusta can dive more than 800 feet. The exact capability is classified.
The greatest danger to a submarine is really the sea itself, and mistakes made by personnel on a submarine, the sea is unforgiving if you make those mistakes.
One breach of a sub's hull can prove fatal. In these eerie images, the crew of the Russian sub Kursk is seen attempting to control a flood during a training exercise last year. American submariners, like the crew of the USS Augusta, are first taught these same kind of emergency procedures at basic enlisted sub school in Groton, Connecticut.
The ship has suffered a collision to the port side while coming to periscope depth. The ship is proceeding deep to clear the contact.
After 5 weeks of classroom instruction, these students are spending their final week of training learning damage control. This flooding chamber simulates conditions in 150 feet of seawater, less than half the depth of where the Kursk came to rest.
The only thing that is not realistic about this is probably the water temperature and the fact that the trainer doesn't move around. In a real flooding situation, you would feel trim angles and list angles on the submarine as the weight of the ship shifted with the water coming on board.
As the students work to repair pipe ruptures, they learn to deal with the stress of a sudden catastrophe.
You learn how invaluable the training is when you get into an experience like that.
Until a leak is sealed, conditions can only get worse. More water aboard means more weight, which in turn makes the sub drop deeper, subjecting it to greater water pressure. In a worst-case scenario, an entire compartment of the sub would have to be sealed off to isolate the damage.
The real danger of flooding is you can't just jump on a lifeboat like you could on a surface ship. Here, if you're submerged and you have flooding, if you don't stop it, everyone will die.
Escape procedures are also practiced at sub school, but because of water pressures, this maneuver is no longer an option deeper than 450 feet. And as was the case in the Barents Sea, ocean temperatures and currents must also be taken into account. The Navy does have 2 deep submergence rescue vehicles designed to evacuate a downed submarine 24 men at a time, but they have never been tested in a real-life situation. In the most dire circumstances, a submarine will conduct what's called an emergency blow. Compressed air is used to force water out of the ballast tanks. The goal is to lighten the ship enough so that it can rise to the surface. But this system was developed and installed in U.S. subs only after tragedy had already taken place.
Yesterday morning, about 9 o'clock, the submarine Thresher plunged into a steep dive beneath the choppy waters of the North Atlantic. The location was 220 miles east of Boston.
129 men were on board when the USS Thresher tested her deep dive capability in 1963. She never returned. And just as questions regarding the cause of the Kursk accident might never be answered, the exact cause of the Thresher accident has never been determined. But the Navy makes certain its future submariners understand the consequences of its loss.
Water coming on board, no propulsion, and the inability to get to the surface caused them to sink below their crush depth. The submarine ruptured. All hands lost.
And in 1968, the USS Scorpion was on its way back from deployment when it went down by the Azores off the coast of Spain. There are two leading theories about what happened: a battery well explosion or a torpedo accident.
99 shipmates on eternal patrol. These gentlemen did not make it back. Aboard the USS Scorpion, all hands lost. Look very hard, gentlemen. What we do is inherently dangerous. I'm not trying to scare you. But the day that you become completely relaxed on a submarine is the day you should be scared.
That is why submariners always prepare for the unexpected. While a sub's in port, crew members are sent to the sub-school fire trainer to run through their procedures, like these future submariners are learning to do.
What they're doing when they come up here for a team trainer is we're giving all that realistic environment to them so they can actually feel the heat, the smoke, the flames, see everything. It makes it more, it just makes it more realistic to them. Pretty much hits home more.
And the disaster training doesn't end on board a sub.
Party galley, party outboard of it!
During this fire drill, the crew of the Augusta places surgical hairnets over their emergency breathing masks to obscure their vision as smoke would, and they wave red flags to represent hot flames. This training is taking place in the kitchen, but the most dangerous fire on a sub would be to the hull insulation. If it's not put under control, it will spread throughout the entire ship.
It gets very smoky real quick, and it gets hot real quick. You got to put that fire out immediately. You have to be on it.
Heat sensors are used to make certain the source of the fire is completely under control.
If you do a set of functions over and over again, when really you have a casualty or you have a crisis, people will fall back on their training and experience to solve the problem or to fight the casualty.
As with flooding, surfacing during a fire is a priority for submarines, because even after the flames are put out, the heat and smoke have to be ventilated.
The busy central hemispheres are within the 90-day limits. Recommend removing breathing protection.
We don't want to take the risk that if we do have a real casualty of some sort, fire, flooding, whatever, that people take the wrong actions and the ship ends up the worse for it.
When we come back.
As sonarmen here, we work for the eyes and ears of the ship. Once the ship submerges, there's no windows into the outside world. So the only input into the submarine is right here.
By a team of highly experienced naval officers. What is life like in this all-male world? There are no women in the submarine service, and who can American submariners turn to when there's trouble? To find out, we boarded the nuclear-powered attack submarine, the USS Augusta.
That's 10 degrees right on my.
Steady course 190.
Steady course 190, bro.
It is the ultimate self-sufficient warfighting machine.
Man battle station.
We are easily able to go to sea and accomplish our mission without any support from the shore.
Up scope. Every day is a work day here, and it's a 24-hour-a-day job while you're underway.
It takes a special man to volunteer for the harsh realities of life aboard a submarine. Submariners do get incentive pay for their difficult duty. Depending on rank and time served, that can mean an additional $75 to $595 a month. But can a few extra dollars make up for the long deployments, close quarters, and lack of sunshine? To answer that question, we traveled 2 miles off the Florida coast to meet the crew of the USS Augusta, one of the Navy's 56 attack submarines. At 360 feet, the Augusta is as long as a football field. It is 33 feet high, 32 feet wide, and when submerged, it displaces nearly 7,000 tons of water. Despite its size, once underwater, the Augusta can travel at speeds greater than 25 knots. That's about 30 miles per hour. Commander Bill Geary is the captain of this 15-year-old nuclear-powered Los Angeles-class submarine.
We've easily crossed the 100-fathom curve, so there's 600 feet of water beneath us, and so we could dive anytime we wanted. Chief Watch, captain down, engineer, Petals Armadeus remain.
When it's out at sea, the Augusta is largely a world unto itself.
The submarine's designed that when we go to sea, we're completely self-sufficient with one exception, and that's food. We can't grow our own food at sea. We make our own air. We make our own water for drinking and showering and washing. We remove toxic gases from the atmosphere with other machinery. The only real limitation we have is how much food we can carry. When we load the ship out for deployment, we'll load cans of food throughout the ship, and for a couple months the crew will be walking on cans of food. Kind of inconvenient, but it's what we have to do to go to sea for long periods of time.
140 crew members inhabit this hollow steel tube on 3 decks. That's a small complement of sailors for a Navy vessel, but considering the space available, it's more than enough people to create tight quarters. Passageways are just 3 feet wide, and the living space is 3,300 square feet, roughly comparable to a 3-bedroom house. Quarters are so cramped that most junior members of the crew must bed down beneath torpedoes. Lieutenant Commander Dave Williams is the executive officer of the Augusta, second in command.
Personal space is very important on board the ship. Everyone's got to be able to find a space they can go to and relax and be by themselves to decompress a little bit at the end of the workday.
As long as you keep yourself busy, you really don't think about how small the space is.
Ship breach door, tube 4.
And keeping busy is rarely a problem. The ship's activities are constant. Stations are manned 24 hours a day. The crew works an 18-hour rotation, 6 hours on duty, 6 hours of sleep, and 6 to perform maintenance work and study systems.
120.
After approximately a year of service, a submariner must demonstrate his knowledge of the ship and its operations to earn his dolphins, the attendant of Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, and the symbol of a bona fide submariner.
What is this course? It's pretty good to know about what you're doing here and how everything comes together on the boat, you know. When you do that, you get to earn your dolphins. And this is one of the highlights of my time in the Navy was when I got my dolphins. Very proud of them.
We get 18-year-old guys right out of high school, and the officers come straight out of college at about 22 years old. And we have to teach them a lot in a very short period of time, so they have the knowledge to take the place of the senior people that left.
You need more than 5 degrees.
Boat assignments for enlisted men average 4.5 years. Officer tours rotate a little more frequently.
We are a very close-knit crew, and the crew needs to help each other out and back each other up continuously. To support that, each crew member has to have a working level of knowledge on all the systems on the ship. So if something were to happen inadvertently, the crew members know how to handle that casualty. If there's a member of the crew that isn't a functioning part of the team, then he gets a lot of attention very quickly.
Last man down, hat secured.
That teamwork is in evidence on the command deck, where the helm, attack center, and navigation are located.
Right now we're about 15 miles off the coast. Okay. And right in the middle of the Gulf Stream, which makes it kind of interesting for navigating, because we got 3 to 4 knots of water rushing up this way, which pushes the ship around. Absolutely.
So the crew must compensate for the ocean currents when plotting the ship's course. It's like swimming across a river, says Lieutenant Bill Ellis, Augusta's navigator and operations officer.
Each of the charts are laid out with the bottom contour in mind. We choose our operating depths in accordance with that. The one thing that the contours do for us is they allow us to help us decide where we are.
The power needed to run the ship's systems is provided by Augusta's nuclear reactor, classified machinery located in the middle portion of the submarine, behind this hatch. Hot water from the reactor core warms water in a secondary system using a heat exchanger.
The secondary system, water becomes steam, which turns turbines and the main engine, providing electricity and a mode of propulsion.
And if the nuclear power plant is the heart of the submarine, Chief Michael Fugate runs its central nervous system. He spoke with MSNBC's Lori Dew.
I mean, as sonarmen here, we're the eyes and ears of the ship. Once the ship submerges, there's no windows into the outside world. So the only input into the submarine is right here.
The word sonar stands for sound navigations and ranging. There are two types of sonar: active, where a ship sends out a signal and waits to hear its echo, and passive, when the equipment listens to all the sounds of the ocean.
Give me a sense, like if another sub were 1.5 miles away, would you be able to track it?
Sure.
How far?
Who knows? I mean, you have to wait till you get in the situation. I mean, the ability for U.S. submarines to track other submarines is a known fact. At what ranges we can track those submarines is classified.
Right.
It's a 24/7 life aboard the Augusta, but occasionally the captain will authorize a swim call when conditions permit, complete with a topside barbecue. But most of a sailor's limited leisure time is spent in the mess hall, playing cards, reading books, or watching videotapes. Out at sea for up to 90 days at a time and away from home for 6 months, the entertainment isn't enough to alleviate the longing for home. Like many of his shipmates, torpedoman Todd Estes finds the hardest part of his job is the isolation from his family, wife Debbie, and 9-month-old Trent.
One deployment, I wrote her every day just to tell her what I was doing, and she did the same at home.
I find it hard at times when he's gone, when things go kind of awry. It gets a little frustrating. You're used to having that other person to turn to, and all of a sudden you're there and you deal with it by yourself.
Recently, the addition of limited email capability has helped to soften the blow of separation. But computers can't replace time lost for Brandy Parsons and her husband Rob, a navigational electronics technician on the Augusta.
My son just started playing t-ball this year, and I'm missing almost all his games. My daughter's got a lot of things going on that I just can't be there for, and sometimes they really miss it.
We do paper chains, and you take one ring off of it every night, and a big bowl of Hershey Kisses, and they get a kiss from Daddy every night before bed, and you do what you can to get through for the kids.
And while the kids sleep, Daddy is probably somewhere deep underwater, performing tasks the details of which only he and his shipmates know.
Man battle station.
When we come back.
Sierra 96 is classified as a merchant who's been designated as hostile. It took us about 30 minutes to get ourselves in a position, about 10 minutes of observations to refine the solution, and we shot him. He never knew we were there. He probably never even knew the torpedo was coming until it exploded.
Make no mistake about it, an American attack sub is feared for the power of its missiles, its ability to fire them thousands of miles, and to sneak right alongside an enemy without being detected. MSNBC investigates how an American attack submarine trains to do just that, attack. How has the strategic role of submarines changed in the last 50 years? For answers, we go back on board the U.S. nuclear-powered submarine, the USS Augusta.
Make it up 150 feet. Helm steady course 240.
Even in peacetime, submarines like the USS Augusta patrol the waters of the world as the unseen stick of U.S. foreign policy.
The first indication that they have that we were there is when we launch. It's much different than being on a surface ship where the guy can look out from his beach and see that there is a presence there.
The USS Augusta can carry any combination of 25 torpedoes and Tomahawk missiles. The sub's mission dictates the weapons on board when it leaves port. Unlike the Russian sub Kursk, the Augusta cannot carry ballistic nuclear missiles.
The submarine is really an incredible multi-dimensional, multi-mission platform.
Rear Admiral Malcolm Phages is the director of the Navy's Submarine Warfare Division.
A submarine commander that goes out has got to be prepared and is often in the course of a 6-month deployment called upon to do anti-submarine warfare, to do strike warfare, to do intelligence collection, to operate with special forces, The crew has got to be able to be exceptionally competent at all of those missions.
Increasingly, the Navy is using its attack submarines to launch precision missile strikes against land targets. During the Gulf War, just a handful of Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched from 2 U.S. submarines. But by 1999 and the NATO operation against Yugoslavia, submarines were firing 25% of the Tomahawks.
Man battle station.
During this mock attack, the USS Augusta demonstrates how submarines can also cut down an enemy's seafaring vessels. First, information gathered in a sonar room helps to locate a nearby cargo ship.
Sierra 96 is the contact of interest. Sierra 96 is classified as a merchant, has been designated as hostile.
The attack center uses that information to determine the distance and speed of the target. 2 decks below, the torpedo room prepares to act on the commands of the captain.
Set. Stand by. Shoot. Shoot. Torpedo course 315, gyro angle 068.
Consider lot explosive bearing 347 on the bearing of Master 1.
They've lost all engine noises from Master 1, and there's a lot of metallic francines on that bearing.
Well, time, make your depth 250 feet.
If this had been a real attack, the Augusta would have fired one of its advanced capability Mk-48 torpedoes, each armed with 650 pounds of heavy explosives. Its target would have been caught completely off guard.
It took us about 30 minutes to get ourselves into position, about 10 minutes of observations to refine the solution, and we shot him. He never knew we were there. He probably never even knew the torpedo was coming until it exploded.
But stealth, not force, is the submarine's greatest asset when performing intelligence gathering, one of its top priorities today.
With the submarine, we're able to go into an area of interest and remain there essentially for an unlimited period of time and have eyes on whatever the item of interest is, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, day or night.
In that way, subs provide better information than flyby satellites and remain out of view of an enemy's satellites. Much of this is possible because of Admiral Hyman Rickover, who transformed the fleet from dirty diesel-powered vessels that needed frequent ventilation into swift, clean, nuclear-fueled ships, beginning with the USS Nautilus, launched in 1954.
It changed the submarine from being a surface ship which submerged periodically and had to remain close to the surface and was essentially detectable to a platform which is unlimited in its ability to operate beneath the sea and invisible indefinitely.
During the Cold War, these surveillance missions had enormous implications.
Nuclear submarines could literally sneak into Soviet waters by taking an enormously circuitous route.
9 Badgers.
Submarines would go right up against Soviet coasts and eavesdrop. They would tap underwater communication cables and eavesdrop on what the Soviets were doing, what their plans were. They would do pretty much anything that they were asked to do. Sometimes they would just go and shadow a Soviet naval exercise. The point was you could hide.
There it goes.
Sherry Sontag is the co-author of Blind Man's Bluff, a bestseller which outlines the role of the submarine force during the Cold War and was written without any official assistance from the Navy.
What the Cold War was about mainly was it was a war of information. Who had nuclear weapons where? What were they doing? And it's remained all about preventing a repeat of Pearl Harbor in a nuclear age.
Today, though the Cold War is over, intelligence gathering remains a priority for submarines like the USS Augusta. 2 U.S. submarines were reportedly monitoring Russia's Northern Fleet training exercises in the Barents Sea when the Kursk went down. When we come back,
it is quite difficult to be away from the family. When we come home, I make a distinct effort to spend as much time as I can with them, to help my wife relax and decompress after she was the head of household for however long I've been gone.
How you doing?
the hardship for most submariners is not the time spent at sea. It's the time spent away from family and loved ones, sometimes with little or no contact. The crew of the USS Augusta is returning from sea to a homecoming of great joy and relief. It's a celebration the families of the Kursk in Russia will not have. For submariners, going home is more than simply returning from a business trip. Because submarines like the USS Augusta often perform highly secretive intelligence gathering missions, communications can be limited at best.
You're taught how to operate that submarine without any guidance, without having to ask for anybody's assistance, and so it's not foreign to go out and spend 3 or 4 months and not talk to anybody.
This operational silence often exacerbates the isolation a submariner can experience.
Unlike the surface ships where they're in email communication 24 hours a day, they receive mail drops from helicopters flying in mail packages or from the ships pulling into port more frequently than submarines do. Submariners have a very limited ability to communicate to and from the ship, and being away from the family is the hardest part.
You can never tell when you're going to hear anything from them. They might be where they can't transmit for a very long time, or they might be in an area where they can send you email every day. You never know.
Brandy Parsons' husband, Rob, is an electronics technician on the Augusta. She is the ship's ombudsman, the captain's liaison with his crew's families, and the family's contact with the boat.
I suppose I'm pretty popular. Yeah, everybody knows who I am and how to get in touch with me. My name is all over. My phone rings constantly.
Any word of the ship's activities is treasured. Debbie Estes' husband, Todd, is a torpedo man on the Augusta.
I'll tell you, I go to my mailbox, and if there's a letter, that's enough momentum to keep you going for 2 weeks. There's no problems. That just fixes everything.
When the wives know that they're going to be pulling in somewhere, nobody leaves their house. If somebody calls, they get them off the phone really fast, and you just sit by the phone and you wait. And it's wonderful when they call.
Everybody has to deal with it their own way. For me, one way of dealing with family separation is to immerse myself in my work.
At 3 o'clock this afternoon, over.
But work isn't always enough, so the captain, Commander Bill Geary, writes to his wife each night in his journal. She reads it upon his return.
That's a way of being able to communicate with her my thoughts during the day. It's a way of focusing myself at the end of the day on really what's important to me, which is my family.
And that makes Commander Geary especially sensitive to his crew's personal needs.
Before we pull into port, the first thing I do when we get on the surface is I call the ombudsman and my wife to find out if there's any family problems that I should forewarn a guy about before he arrives on the beach and it hits him square in the face.
At the mouth of the Thames River, subs returning to their Groton, Connecticut base are boarded by a harbor pilot to guide the ship back to port.
They're coming, they're coming, they're coming. Over here.
At the same time, family members eagerly await the first glimpse of their husbands and fathers. But for some, the homecoming can be tough.
It's hard for a father to come home and have his son not go to him to ask those things like, can I go outside? He's asking Mom. You want him to ask you. So it's frustrating, it's difficult, and thank God my wife is super about helping me acclimate back into the family life.
Even so,
coming home is always better than leaving.
Though the Augusta is returning from only a 3-week cruise, emotions are running high. The ship is coming home the day after Father's Day. Executive Officer Dave Williams has a 4-month-old son.
It is quite difficult to be away from the family. When we come home, I make a distinct effort to spend as much time as I can with them, to help my wife relax and decompress after she was the head of household for however long I've been gone.
How you doing?
For Chief Michael Fugate and his wife Darlene, the sub's arrival was just in time. Their second child, a baby girl, was born 10 days later.
It's hard for all of us, but coming home is just so sweet that it makes it worthwhile.
The submariners and their families can now reacquaint themselves with one another. But after a couple of days, it will be back to duty. Maintenance work and planning for the next voyage will keep the crew busy. preparations for their ever-evolving missions of national security in an undersea world that remains largely unknown to the people they protect. It's been more than 30 years since the U.S. lost a sub at sea. The Navy counts on programs like SubSafe to keep the sailors safe and alive. They are trained daily to check and recheck everything on board, from electric shavers to coffee pots to those missiles. They are in a constant state of readiness. And the tragedy aboard the Kursk reminds them what a fierce enemy the sea can be to those who serve and protect down below. That's it for this edition of MSNBC Investigates. I'm Lester Holt. Thank you for watching.